Let's face it, business technology is frustrating and complex. So how do you make sure it works for your team? To make IT right, start the discussion at go-domain.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Anthony, the host of Discussions by Domain podcast. In this quick introduction, I wanted to discuss part one of Brian Burke's episode. He is the director over at the Crypsis Group. In part one, he discussed the ransomware trends in 2018 and 2019 for businesses here in the Northeast. And he also discussed how that affects their business interruption and profitability over multiple days. In part two, Brian gets into business email compromise, as well as phishing attacks, and what that looks like for organizations and how they can potentially protect themselves from that. It was great having Brian on. I hope you guys really enjoyed part two, and he shares some tips and tricks that you guys can all use. Enjoy the show, and we'll see you at the end.
Thank you very much for having me, Anthony. And, since we're talking about email compromise, you definitely need to talk about phishing as well. So any type of phishing attacks, the email compromise, that's something that could be a result of a phishing attack. But you could also experience an email compromise by clicking on a phishing link that's sent to you. So you never know how things are actually going to happen. But in terms of, educating yourselves about phishing attacks, things to look out for, doing internal training and education, doing a phishing campaign, and just getting a general raw score of how many individuals in our organization had passed or failed. Fortunately, it's not the, okay, I squeaked through with a D+. No, I mean, that's not going to be sufficient. If you have 98% of the company pass and 2% that didn't, it only takes one individual. And, we are human, and innately we have flaws. And sometimes we're so entrenched with our work and we're moving at a fast speed that we click on something that we just don't assume that it is a phishing link. But attackers are getting so sophisticated, and if they have your information, or if they have, the credentials of somebody that you work with or know outside of work, they could be receiving information to tailor a phishing attack to you. So it's an email that you're more likely to click on, more likely to open, so it's just something to think about. And if you're talking about email compromises, you're going to have an attacker who's going to sit in your environment and maybe understand some things, maybe understand your financials, and maybe they understand the cash flow that you have. And that's why it leads to some type of wire fraud. Maybe they'll move laterally and be able to get credentials of other users within the network. So whether we're trying to combat, an email compromise internally or kind of fight it off externally, I think the email compromise and phishing, tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's a great point, and especially from our eyes on this side of the table, whenever we do these tests or hear about the results of them, usually it's the executives that are the worst offenders, and at the end of the day, they usually have the keys to the kingdom.
Unfortunately so. And that's such a great point. Everybody is susceptible. Anyone and everyone is susceptible to a cyber attack. So it's just something you got to be aware of. Even if you think you're the CEO of a company and your IT department has got you covered, it's always better to be safe than sorry.
All right, let's change up gears a little bit and go to what does the future look like for the industry that you're specifically in here? And you had a couple points you wanted to mention in this area. I wanted to let you go over those with us.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the industry, I mean, the number one thing that you or any of the listeners, I think, would say is that it's growing rapidly. So it's quite interesting in that sense. By no means did, myself or Crypsis get involved in the cyber industry at its inception. No, it's been around for quite some time. But right now, I think is really just a pivotal time in terms of the change in that cyber market, where more individuals are, susceptible to attacks, and more individuals are going down the route of cybercrime. But in the same breath, you have people who are graduating from high school in the States going into cyber programs in college. Or you have individuals who are leaving high school or college, and maybe they're going down the route of, serving our country. And maybe they're going into the Navy and there's a cyber program there. Maybe they're going to local law enforcement. So the industry is growing. There are more threats out there, but I think that we're doing a great job in combating that. It's really great. I'm based in New York, live on Long Island. I work out of Crypsis's Manhattan office in Times Square. And just locally, I think Rutgers in New Jersey, they have a cyber program that they're putting together. So even just driving down the highway and seeing something being advertised on let's say probably 95. But, when you're seeing these advertisements, it's just it's kind of a cool thing, for lack of a better explanation. It's nice to know that the more attacks that are going on, the more people who are going into the cyber industry to prevent that in the future. So I think that is the most interesting, that we're growing by the sophistication and the amount of attacks that we're seeing, but in the same breath, how we're creating and propelling forward the cybersecurity industry, whether it would be from Crypsis' side of things, on the forensics, or on domain side of things, or anything in between. So I find that great.
I love that, and thanks for the shout out to the Rutgers Cybersecurity Certificate Program. I am on the board advisory for them, so I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and like I said, I feel like this is all in recent years. I actually don't know when you had started. I guess your relationship with Rutgers there. When was that?
It's just recent. About April 1st is when I officially became on the board, and actually April 17th, tomorrow, is my first board meeting.
Great. Well, formally, congratulations, Anthony.
Thank you,
That's
sir.
Great. But so this is not something that I saw 3 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm truly excited about that. On a personal note, I took a call from my father-in-law a little bit earlier, and somebody he works with, his son is graduating from college and looking forward to the forensics world. And, just thought I could be somebody that he could speak with. And, it's just funny. It's not the first time that somebody I know or my father knows or, a friend of the family. So that's just something that, I wouldn't thought of years ago. It's good stuff.
That's awesome. It's growing. All right, let's learn a little bit more about Brian and get into some of these rapid fire questions that I typically ask. So we'll start with, if you could go back, you just graduated UNC, and you could tell your 21, 22-year-old self some advice about where you are now and how to get there, what would that be?
It's a good question. Well, if I could have, let's see, my anniversary at Crypsis was on April 1st, which is, great to be a part of Crypsis for so long. But if I even gave myself 3 years ago, I would have told myself to get into the cybersecurity industry much sooner than later. But on a serious note, I would say look out for trends in the marketplace. What are regulations promoting? What new businesses, business sectors are emerging? What companies within those sectors are, something to get in at the ground level, at the initial stages on. That's something that I would probably, tell my 22 or 25-year-old self is, I would say go out there and look for the change. Where is that happening? In what industry is it happening? And how can you be a part of that? I personally say that just because I wish I was in the cyber world much, much earlier than I have been. And just being a part of Crypsis, who was, we were created in 2015 and we've grown leaps and bounds since then. To be a part of a company that is, nimble and energetic and has a great atmosphere and are, we're in a certain light first responders and helping, victims of cybercrime kind of get up and shrug it off and move forward with their business or their lives. So this for me is just a very exciting time to be in this industry. And I think I hit the nail on the head with joining Crypsis, and I couldn't be happier there. So I would have looked for this industry sooner, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you wanted to take one of my passions, I love to cook. Threw around the idea many of times of going to, kind of a restaurant management or culinary school. And I feel like the culinary world has shifted and changed a lot over the past 10 years. And, I always, daydreaming and thinking about, what if I got involved in Blue Apron or one of these meal delivery services that everybody's talking about? That would be cool to be an innovator within the industry or be a part of a company that's looked at as an innovator or a thought leader. So it's not apples to apples by any means, but it's kind of, why I say this about Crypsis. It's the ground floor of a great industry, and I'm just happy to be here.
That's awesome. The audience isn't going to let me get away with not asking you, what is a staple dish that Brian makes?
That's a good question. So I'm trying to change up my eating habits a little bit, but long story short is I love making homemade pasta and kind of the sauces and the accoutrement that would go along with it. So while it may not be the most healthy thing at all times, it's definitely a guilty pleasure.
All right. Once I get back out there in Nassau County, you better be ready to drop it.
100%.
All right, so I'm an avid reader. Give me a couple of books that you've either gifted to others or that have changed your thoughts over your lifespan.
So that's a good question. So I'm probably not the best person for this question right now, as any and all books that I've recommended or have been recommended to me that I've read recently have all been related to becoming a father. So my wife and I are expecting our first. So
congratulations!
Thank you. We've been doing a lot of reading there. So a recommendation to me and a recommendation that I've given to others are, let's see, what are we reading here? We're Pregnant. The First Time Dad's Pregnancy Handbook. So something like that. But no, I mean, on a serious note, like I said, a lot of things that I do read recently have been, preparing myself to be a father. But like I said, I do love to cook and I do love the restaurant world and I love how food brings people together. You're sharing a meal, but it's more than that. It's the time with that individual and the conversations that come along with that and the memories that are created. So I do tend to gravitate towards books in the food genre. There's a book, I forget the author, but it's called My Paris Kitchen. And just kind of I don't know. I read the book and just the sense that it gave me. The sense of pride of putting your effort into a meal and having people over to share that with is a lot. So what I take from the cooking world is just cherish your relationships and the time that you have with people. And if you can share a meal with them and have a conversation with them, it's definitely something that you can look back on, in the future. And that's always special time, whether it's me thinking back of, my late great grandmother and, all the Italian meals that we've shared with one another, or just kind of the first date that I took my wife on 12 years ago or whatever it may be. Definitely cherish those relationships.
I love it. And I also love how you got so much out of a book about cooking for other things too, which is really cool. And we'll definitely link to that book in the show notes.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it ties into the cyber industry a little bit as well. I mean, it's, cooking is a lot about being prepared. In this world and tying it back into cyber, everything is about being prepared. Whether we're talking about email compromise or we're talking about ransomware or you're talking about, intellectual property theft, whatever it may be, if the company or the victim of a cybercrime is prepared, you will be able to know what your next step is and how to combat that. So I just think if anything, the takeaway from this, from myself is be prepared. We can no longer say that. One of the things I say sometimes is it's the teenager mentality, right? This is never going to happen to me. Why do I need to think about this? I just work for this type of company. Why would I be susceptible to attack? That's no longer, that's not enough. You can't take that, apathetic approach. You need to understand that anything can happen to anyone. So be prepared. Maybe it's a little bit extra legwork on your end to, reach out to an attorney, into a forensics firm, and to an MSP, and collectively put together an incident response plan. But like I said, better safe than sorry.
And we'll finalize with who is a thought leader, innovator, practitioner here in the Northeast that our audience should know about, and why?
I do look at my CEO, Bret, Padres, as well as my colleague, Sam Rubin, as being two great thought leaders in this space. Bret is based in our headquarters in McLean, Virginia, so not necessarily the Northeast, and Sam is based out of Los Angeles, so not even close to the Northeast. But Bret has been asked to speak at many different functions, and time again, I'm just impressed with what he has to say, some of the war stories and things that he has seen. So again, I don't want it to be a shameless plug, but every time I hear Bret speak, and even just sitting down in meetings internally, I'm just always thoroughly impressed. So that would have to be, kind of the top of my list.
Love it. Thank you for that. And finally, where can people go to learn more about yourself, about Crypsis? What social channels do you prefer? And how can they easily get to you?
Absolutely. So the Crypsis website would be a great place to start. So if you Googled the Crypsis Group, you'd be able to come upon our website. It does give some brief bios of our leadership team. It gives some information into the services that we provide. I believe on the top right portion of the homepage is our hotline. So if there's anything going wrong at any time, feel free to call that. So definitely a good place to start. There's also, I think, a portion of the website where you can submit an inquiry. So if you have any questions, concerns, if you wanted somebody to reach out to you, that's one way to do that. You can also find me, Brian Burke, on LinkedIn, and you can connect with me there. And anybody who does, I'm always excited of growing my network and meeting new people and having a conversation, whether it's just to kind of share industry information or if there's something that I could do to help.
To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. This guarantees that every episode will get delivered directly to your device. To help us get the word out, share with a friend, leave a review, and check out our discussions on the web at go-domain.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.